Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, let's learn about a new feature of Postman that is game changing in the space of API management. So I'm sure many of you must have tried Postman for testing your APIs, but in this video, I'll introduce you to a new feature called Postman Spec Hub. So using this new feature, you can design or author API specification according to compliance and governance. It also has an inbuilt validator. So you're rest assured your API specification is well indented and it is according to the industry standard. It can also generate documentation from your API specification, which is a great thing. But on top of all of these, the best part of Postman Spec Hub for me, you can generate collections from your API specification. What does this mean? This means now you can use Postman for your entire API lifecycle management. You don't need one tool for designing the APIs. You don't need one tool to build your API, and you don't need another tool for testing your API. Now, under one roof, that is Postman, you can design, you can mock test your API, you can get the documentation of your API, and you can also test your API. I'm sure this video is going to be quite interesting because Spec Hub is addressing some important challenges of API first approach. So just make sure you watch this video till the end. Before we get started, I should thank Postman for sponsoring today's video and believing in our content. Let's get started. So let's understand the problem statement first. If you look at API lifecycle management, there are four important phases. That means every product team has to go through these phases to ship their API. Starting with the design phase, that the solution architect or senior developer works on authoring the API specification. It can be as simple as which HTTP request should the API accept. Maybe the API should only accept the GET request. How should the response look like if the request is successful? How should the response look like if the request is a failure? In the YAML format, at times in the JSON format, and this is quite long as well. So to make it simple, Solution Architect also provides a detailed documentation for the API specification. In a nutshell, during the design phase, Solution Architect works on authoring the API specification and providing the documentation for the API specification. I'll also show you some examples as we move forward in the video. Let's call this as V1 of the spec, and V1 of the API spec is ready. Developers look at the spec and they start writing the code, they start developing the API, and once the API is ready, DevOps engineers pick this version of the API and they deploy it onto the server. Let's call it as V1. Now finally, QA engineers do the important part where they validate if the API is as per the specification. So developers develop the API, but is the API really according to the specification provided by the solution architect? Probably QA engineer tries to make some good request, bad request to validate if the response is as expected. Now the reason why I call it as V1, because this is a circle. As your API is shipped to the customer might come up with new requirements. So solution architect updates the spec as per the new requirements. And this time this becomes V2 or V1.1. Similarly, developer looks at 1.1 of spec and updates the source code. As the source code is updated, DevOps engineer deploys this new version of API as V1.1 and QA engineer starts testing V1.1. And this is a circle. And this exactly is API lifecycle management. Now, while all of it looks very good, there are some challenges if the design phase is not implemented well. And most of the companies do not implement the design phase well because they go with manual approach. Let me explain. As I told you, solution architect works on authoring the spec and updating the documentation. Both of these things, spec as well as document, are mostly shared through Notion or some internal tools, or at times through the Confluence pages. Imagine there is a company that is working on developing a to-do application. So the solution architect provides the API specification, something like this, on a Notion document, or as I told you, through Confluence. And the documentation for the API specification is provided through a different location. Now, this becomes very tricky because if there is a single version of API, it's quite fine. Imagine you have v1.0, 1.1, 1.2, and all three of them are active. That means all three versions of the API are shipped to the customer, used by one customer or the other. Then you have three different specs and you have six different documents. And there are also cases where solution architect updates the API spec, but forgets to update the documentation. As a developer, you might look at the spec, you might develop the application as per the spec, but QA engineers who are referring the documentation for the spec, QA engineers might not understand the JSON format that well, or might not understand YAML format that well. So they go through the documentation, but solution architect forgot to update the documentation. So QA engineer marks the test case as failure. Trust me, this leads to endless meetings because developer says, I developed the application as per the requirement, but QA engineer says, no, I verified it and it's a failure. Now the solution architect, developer, QA engineer, all of them get into a meeting, and the end result is that documentation or the spec is not updated well. Now, all of this because companies rely on the Notion documents or Confluence documents to update the specification as well as the spec documentation. Not only this, there are other challenges. If solution architect relies on Confluence page or any other internal tools, the spec might not be validated. The spec might not be according to OpenAPI 3 or industry standard. So that is another concern, right? If the spec is not according to the governance and compliance, the whole API development goes into waste. Architect has provided the spec, developer developed it, tester or QA engineer tested it, but end of the day, you realize that the spec is not according to the standard. To avoid all of this, you need a tool. And what does this tool has to do? Or probably you need a feature in the existing tool which can, one, help you define the API spec according to industry standard, which can help you author the API spec according to the governance and compliance, which can auto generate the documentation. Imagine if solution architect only has to write the API spec and documentation is auto generated. Wouldn't it be amazing? And everything is well indented, right? Now, this is a perfect thing to have. And this is exactly what Postman Spec Hub does. So Postman Spec Hub, as I told you, is a new feature where it is integrated onto the Postman platform. I'm sure your QA team or your development team might already been using Postman. Now your solution architect or your management also has to onboard to the Postman platform because now the design can also be done on the Postman platform using Spec Hub. In the next part of the video, we will be looking at how to use the Spec Hub. I will show you through a demonstration, how you can author the API, and how the documentation is auto-generated, how the collections are also auto-generated. But before that, I would like to quickly show you what all Postman Spec Hub can do. So Spec Hub, it allows you to write a multi-format API. Everything is at one place. You also have an editor in the Spec Hub, built-in validation and governance, which I just explained, collaboration without chaos, one-click collection generation, and seamless spec to collection sync. So I explained all of this in the theory part. If you want to understand more, you can also go through this page, Postman Spec Hub, where you have the complete details. Now let's head to the demo part. For the purpose of demo, you need an account with Postman. Again, just use the link in the description or pin comment. You'll get to this page. Click on Launch Postman. By providing few details, you have your account set up with Postman. I have my account for a long time now. I have a lot of my projects already on Postman where I use REST API client, Postman API builder. However, you can also invite your team. As you can see, I have my team already on Postman and we are collaborating on the platform. So you can create your team and you can invite your peers. And the first thing that you can do is create a new workspace. Of course, you can go with default workspace, but I always prefer creating a new workspace for a new project. So click on create workspace. You have a lot of templates to choose from. I'll go with blank workspace. Let's provide a name for it. I'll call it as Spec Hub Demo YT. Do you want to keep your workspace internal? That means, do you want to keep your APIs private or do you want to make it publicly accessible? Initially, while you're working on the new API specification, I would recommend to keep it internal. Later, you can make it public. And I always want to have my other developers access to the playground or access to the workspace. So yeah, I'll grant them access and click on the create button. Perfect. So we have our workspace ready for Spec Hub demo. Now let's try out the demo part. But Abhishek, for which application are we going to try out the demo? So we'll use the same to-do application. So the design is going to be very simple. So what we'll do is, we'll assume a simple to-do application where multiple tasks can be added to the to-do application, and we will use an API called task/task ID, where if someone makes request to this API, right, your DNS or domain name followed by task followed by task ID. Let's say the task ID is provided as 1. Then our API should get the information of the first task and show it to the customer or show it to the user. That's it. We will design a very simple API. So we'll start with designing the spec for it. Even if you're not good with YAML or JSON, trust me, in next 10 minutes, you will find everything simple because most of the part is automated. So Spec Hub, you will not find it on the sidebar, or you may not find it on the sidebar. All that you have to do is click on Configure Workspace sidebar. So you have various features. Go to spec and enable it. That's it. You will start seeing specs on your workspace sidebar. Okay, let's generate a new spec. And there are two popular standards, OpenAPI 3.0, AsyncAPI 2.0. So I'll go with OpenAPI 3.0, and immediately Postman generates a sample specification for me. And this is the best part. Like the sample API spec, like it has the server name for you. So you can just customize the server name. Imagine you work for Nike.com. So you can just replace example.com with Nike.com. You can modify the contact details, you can modify the version of the API, you can just modify the description. You can also customize the paths. So the sample specification, the path that is provided, it looks like a e-commerce application that is selling spacecrafts. So the path is HTTP request type get where spacecraft slash spacecraft ID. Now, quite obviously, our path would be task slash task ID, right? All that I have to do is just modify this path. Get request is totally fine for me. So I'll just leave it as a get request. And I will also update the schema accordingly. I'll update spacecraft ID with task ID. I'll update spacecraft with task and I will leave the error as is. Cool. So let's go ahead and start customizing the spec. So what will we modify example.com to? For the purpose of demo, I have a domain for you where a fake API is hosted and we can actually use this fake API. So we'll make request to this website and it returns a response back. So this is JSON placeholder. We'll just copy this entire thing, JSON placeholder dot typecode.com. Right? So let's go back, change the server name accordingly. Perfect. I'll just change the contact owner to Veeramalla and list of to-do apps. Right? If you're not interested in modifying the description, it's totally fine because it's just a metadata. Here is the important thing. You just need to make sure the path is updated. All that you see on the left side are important pieces of your specification. So at least make sure you update them. Spacecraft slash spacecraft ID. So I'll just change it to task slash task ID. As I told you, it comes with an inbuilt validator. So I updated the task ID and instantly you can see that there is one error on the documentation and there is also a lot of red lines. And as soon as I change this to task ID, you will notice all of them disappear, right? So it's good that you have a validator like something like an inbuilt editor and I updated the task ID. You will see that documentation is also updated for the task ID. Cool. Okay. So we'll also update the schema. This should be task ID, right? And instead of read a task spacecraft, I'll update it to read a task, right? And task ID. I might not be updating all of the things, respecting the time of the demo. So I'll just update few important pieces. While you're doing it at your end, you can just make sure that you update the things well. Task, right? You get a lot of help from this editor, which is a good thing. Task ID. I think we are all good. So this is a spacecraft ID. This should also be task ID. Right. So this is changed to task ID in the schema. This is changed to task. And we have the task ID here. Yeah, I think we are all good. Perfect. So now the API specification for the to-do application is all ready. But Abhishek, how do I frame the GET request? Right? Maybe you are completely new, or maybe a QA engineer. So you went through the specification, you looked at the documentation that is generated on the right-hand side, but you're not sure how to frame the GET request. You don't have to worry. There is an option here to generate collection. Click on generate collection. Let's call this as to-do API, generate collection. That's it. So you have a collection generated for you, the to-do API, task ID, read the task, right? Now I can make a HTTP request. Let's see what is the expected response. If you go to JSON placeholder, So they say that if you run this particular URL with to-dos /1, this is the expected response. Let me see if that works. So I'll just change task/1. Base URL is JSON placeholder typeecho.com. Send a request. Okay, my bad. Instead of tasks, it should be to-dos, right? So if you see here, it is to-dos. So yeah, we can just go back to the specs. It is also good that I can show you as I update the specs, the collection is updated. So this instead of tasks should be to-dos and this should be to-do ID, which is good. Let's just change this to to-do ID, right? So I'll just change this to to-do ID as well. This will be to-do ID. Perfect. This will be my to-do. And this is my to-do ID. So I'll just go here, update. Now my collection has to be updated. Okay. So I have to-dos here, to-do, and now let's try to make API call by changing to-do ID to 1 and tada. So we have the response that is expected, right? So this way, Postman becomes a unified or a solo platform where your solution architect, developer, QA engineer, all of you can collaborate. If you have any questions related to spec, you know where to go. If you have any questions related to the documentation of spec, the documentation is auto-generated. You can look at the documentation. You can also go to the collections. And the best part, as soon as the spec is updated, collections are also updated. Perfect. So this is how you can use Postman Spec Hub. Now, even if your specification is thousands of lines, you don't have to worry. You can use the Spec Hub to easily write the spec. So that's all I have for today's video. One final thing, I would recommend everyone to go back and explore Postman Spec Hub. So you just have to create a free account and start exploring how you can define the spec, how you can author spec according to the OpenAPI standard, according to compliance, and how it auto generates the documentation. See you all in the next video. Take care. Bye bye.